Hello, and thanks for joining us today for our program on homegrown and homemade drug threats. I'm Stan Rhodes. Drugs like marijuana and methamphetamine can be grown and manufactured almost anywhere, and the threats go beyond the user. For example, there are the people who end up burned during meth making, the toxic waste that comes from growing marijuana, healthcare expenses related to growing and manufacturing of these drugs, and the list goes on. Well, two experts are with me today to talk about the threats related to growing marijuana and the making of methamphetamine. Let me introduce them. Jason Poore is a special agent with the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission in Knoxville, Tennessee. Jason is currently assigned to the Tennessee Governor's Task Force on Marijuana Eradication. Brian Sully is a detective with the Albuquerque, New Mexico Police Department. Brian works mostly with the methamphetamine unit. Well, welcome to both of you. Jason, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about the current trends that we're seeing out there. What's the newest thing going on with growing marijuana?
Well, across the country, we're seeing an increase of indoor marijuana grows, and the outdoor is kind of adapting to the eradication efforts and along with weather and other issues. But we're also seeing the cartels maybe increasing in their domestic production with the large drug trafficking organization style grows.
So basically there's a growth with all of this.
Yes.
And Brian, what about meth manufacturing?
Biggest change is meth labs are making a comeback, and in different types of labs that we're seeing. They're smaller, faster to complete the process, and making it harder and harder to find them.
So from point A to point B. Aren't many states having more restrictions and limiting the purchase of pseudoephedrine, which is the main ingredient, isn't it?
Yes, we have the Federal Combat Meth Act that went into effect to control the sale of the pseudoephedrine in the cold medicine. And most states have implemented their own statutes. Most of them mirror the federal guidelines. It's helped restrict the sale of it, but it hadn't eliminated. They've learned how to work around it, and what we call Smurfs, and they go from store to store buying it. So it's still out there.
Are there other ways to manufacture meth than the long cook method?
Well, they've altered the different methods. We have the traditional anhydrous ammonia that was called the Nazi, and then they have the variations of it called the one pot or shake and bake that's sped the process up, puts it all in one container. And they've even come up with some variations of the red phosphorus production method that have helped speed up the process. So it's taken less and less time for them to do each batch.
So they've come up with a way to make it simpler, quicker.
Simpler, quicker, and just as good.
To get it out there. You both are in law enforcement. Do you understand the risks that are involved with your particular area with with marijuana, and you with methamphetamine? Do you know the risks that are out there? Are you seeing new risks, different things?
Well, you've always got, especially with marijuana grows, you've always got the booby traps and the grower themselves.
This would be outdoors?
Yes, and even indoors.
Indoors? Okay.
Yes. But now we're starting to run into more of the molds and a lot of the actual health hazards affiliated with even indoor or outdoor marijuana grows with chemicals that they use and things like that.
How are you being trained to spot a particular, for example, let's take an outdoor grow section. How are you being trained to spot that taking place?
Most of it is practically on experience for the most part. Marijuana spotters have, back in the early 80s, a lot of the agencies had marijuana spotters trained in military, National Guard, pilots and things like that. Mm-hmm. Of course, more recent years, we're running into spotting programs and things along those lines that you actually go out, you go with veteran spotters, and then they kind of direct you and teach you how to spot for it.
The growers are getting more sophisticated?
Yes. They went from back, I guess, in the 1980s, of acres and acres of patches. We had some in eastern Tennessee that from one end of the patch to the other was almost a mile. And anyone could see that marijuana from the air. And now we're starting to see
hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, practically. And now they are 10 to 100 plants, and moving under trees and things like that. So they're trying to do everything they can do to hide it from the helicopters, but marijuana still has to grow with sunlight and other things, so they're having to adapt to that also.
What about indoor grows?
Indoor grows, that's really the easiest way to hide them because, you're inside, you can kind of control your security a little more.
Is there anything that you can use technology-wise from the air to see or to indicate that something's going on?
Due to some federal case law now that we have to have a thermal imaging warrant for, to use the FLIR or thermal imaging. But there are some other technologies that are being tested and kind of played with to try to zero in on those a little easier. But there are some things out there that it's still adapting.
Mm-hmm. Brian, what about meth labs? I mean, we got the shake and bake that can happen in a car, a van,
anywhere.
or what have you.
Yeah, it's done in a 2-liter pop bottle, so it's easy, convenient, fast. It's done in an hour, 2 hours. So we're seeing variations of the old methods, making the high-quality meth, and we're seeing the increases. The biggest danger for law enforcement now is that these are getting smaller and smaller, so they're harder to see, and it's easier to walk by. Everything I need walk into traffic stop. I'm making a regular traffic stop for a red light violation, and in the back seat, the guy has a full-blown meth lab going. In a house, the telltale signs that we used to look for are smaller and smaller. The number of blister packs, the chemicals used. Instead of making ounces to pounds, now we're seeing more and more of them making a half ounce
and
or
why
less.
Is that for their personal use or to manufacture, they can get it out quicker? Why is
Some
that?
of them, most meth cooks, especially in these smaller labs, they're making for their own use, but they're also selling some of it. So if they make up a half ounce, they may keep half of it for their own use and sell the other half, enough to recoup the cost or share it with the people in their group. That's one of the other things in law enforcement we're trying to stress, to go after the entire group, not just the one person cooking, but all the people that are supplying them the chemicals, the Smurfs going out and buying the cold medicine, buying the other chemicals, doing the other crimes to help finance it. You go after the whole group, but it's harder to see. It's easier to move them around. They're quick to move them. So they're spreading their contamination over a wider range of locations, which is making it a lot more dangerous for everybody. Because the meth lab's nothing but a hazardous waste site that happens to be a crime scene also. So we have dual dangers with that.
So it could be a house, it could be a car, a van, and the dangers vary between those.
Vary, and people think, well, it's little, so it can't be that hazardous. But the little shake and bakes are catching fire and blowing up more than ever. And that's a hazard to anybody that's close by.
Jason, what kind of risks are associated with marijuana grows? We'll take outdoor, for example.
With your outdoor grows, the grower themselves, they have to defend against several different things. Animals, deer, cattle, things like that.
That would eat the
Yeah, they actually love marijuana. I really don't know why, but they will eat it. And then you've also got their friends or their coworkers, if you want to call them that will come in and steal the marijuana prior to maturity or when they get ready to harvest it. Right
Somebody's
before.
watching, just ready to come in and reap it.
And then there's always the state ERAD or local ERAD teams that will come in and just cut it themselves.
But are there hazards associated with the outdoor grows? I mean, besides the booby traps, are there hazards that are used in the manufacturing, the growing of the marijuana?
For outdoor, we're starting to see, especially in California, there's some illegal grow additives that the EPA banned in the U.S. back in as far back as 1990.
Kind of like a steroid for the plant.
Well, yes, and also it's a little more potent, like bug deterrent and things like that, or insecticides. So, they were banned in the U.S., but they're still smuggling them in from Mexico to use on the plants. And some of them are even dangerous to the touch or if you inhale it or anything. So, we're starting to see some of those chemical issues that otherwise you would see, in indoor environments only. Now we're starting to find those outside also.
But now let's take it back and go to the indoor setting. And you walk in or go into an indoor setting. Are there hazards involved with that, with the air or any of that?
Yes. They will use a modification of pumping carbon dioxide into a grow room because the plants really thrive off of
So removal of
CO2.
the oxygen.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, you can go into an oxygen deficient room, which is also common with the meth labs and things. But when you go in there, you may also run into these grow additives. As long as they're in their design container and not being mixed with anything, they're practically safe. You'll see a lot of the same chemicals you'd use in a garden. But once they mix, or if they're in unnamed containers, you spill them, and of course electrical hazards and other things along with all that, then it does become a pretty dangerous environment.
Wow. Well, we'll continue this conversation a little bit more. Well, recently, an organized marijuana group set up shop in the Midwestern city, but thanks to some very alert residents and good police work, it was shut down.
A warehouse filled with paraphernalia. A fenced-in area filled with bags and bags of dried marijuana plants. All of this evidence comes from a dozen elaborate indoor marijuana grow operations in the Lincoln, Nebraska area. Police found them during a 6-week period beginning in early March of 2010.
We're used to discovering and dismantling and investigating 2, 3, 4 indoor grows a year that consist of anywhere from a small number of plants, 4, 6, 8, 12, to at the most 100 to 125 plants, to now dismantling homes with over 1,000 plants actively growing inside. It's a significant shift in a perspective.
The street value of the marijuana is around $14 million, and that's only the plants that were actively growing when the Lincoln-Lancaster Drug Task Force busted them.
In the dismantling these grows, we found evidence of a much longer term operation and evidence of many more plants that would have been. So that would be, in our opinion, a low number.
Some of the operations had been going on for years in all kinds of houses. Most were unoccupied, and neighbors saw a few things that didn't seem right.
We noticed it was real strange, and we were real tied up between being nosy and thinking something was really bad. These 2 Orientals would come, and as they're coming down the street, they'd open a garage door. They had an opener, and they'd go right straight in the garage, and they'd close the door before they even got the brake lights off. And you'd never see them again for probably 45 minutes to an hour, and then they'd back out and they'd leave, and that'd be it for the day.
At each grow house, detectives noticed a similar theme.
It just seems like many of the places that we would serve search warrants, the neighbors would come up to us later and say, yes, I knew it. I knew what was going on. I just never called, or I smelled marijuana. I've been smelling marijuana for a year, but I just never called.
Evidence from one grow house would often lead detectives to another. The grows had similar characteristics, like blacked out windows, security signs out front, underground wiring in a neighborhood where most houses had overhead wires, and electric diversion before the meter, creating a safety issue.
The homes involved that had electrical diversions, the diversions themselves were not done by certified electricians or weren't done to a standard or code acceptable by the community. So you had live wires running all over the place, crisscrossing the basements, drilled through floors, through foundations, etc. That made it dangerous for groups officers to pass through.
Then there was the mold and the chemicals.
These are hydroponic grows in the sense that the growth and pesticides and plant foods were all mixed into a large trash can and then sprayed daily on these plants. That spray would be on the leaves that the officers had to pass through to dismantle the grow. They'd be on the floor, they'd be in the soil when you're handling the pots, they'd be in the air as particulates as you're walking through and stirring this stuff up.
It's stuff many narcotics officers aren't used to dealing with, but other units are.
Originally, we didn't have our Clan Lab meth team helping us process the scenes, but as these continued to go and get larger, we did call in our Clan Lab, or our methamphetamine team, to assist us in the dismantling of the marijuana grows.
The dismantling and the cultivation led to thousands of dollars worth of destruction to the homes.
There's just a considerable amount of damage and repair and cleanup done before these houses can ever be lived in again, and which would certainly impact their property value and the property value of their neighbors.
One man knows that all too well.
All of this was full of dirt up to, about here, potting soil.
He owns 2 of the homes his tenants turned into indoor grows.
My analogy when people ask me about it is, it's like turning the inside of a house into a greenhouse or a hothouse. That's the closest I can get. Everything from the air conditioning and the heating and cooling ducts, we've got to bring companies in here to clean all of everything. Back here is where they cut a hole in the floor and brought the venting tubes up from the basement area and then they ran it up through the original attic access and then tied them off to the wind turbines up on the roof. I mean, this was a sophisticated operation. This was not rookies that came in here, and it was a system.
The growers drilled holes in the foundation to access the power line to the house, installed circuit breakers and switches to run everything, and had plants everywhere.
This was another room down here that, again, these are 12-inch squares on the floor here of tile, and every one of those would have held a plant. Just enough room for them to get in here and fertilize them, water them, harvest them.
Insurance covers only a fraction of the $50,000 cost of making this house livable again. Some of the other houses are simply being ignored. The lawns are overgrown, vehicles are abandoned in the driveway, and they're eyesores.
Some of the owners are associated with the conspiracy to grow this marijuana have been arrested. Their ability to maintain the properties have been impacted because they're in jail or in custody or fled the jurisdiction.
And while the growers may be gone, the evidence remains, meaning issues for the Lincoln Police Department's property unit.
Well, you take it one day at a time and just deal with it. It's overwhelming. When you first start, you got a couple operations and it's not a big deal. And then they keep coming and keep coming and keep coming, and you're just like, okay, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And just find that you have to deal with it.
Luckily, a large building usually reserved for vehicles involved in accidents was empty and became the secure storage facility for all of the equipment used in the elaborate marijuana grow operations.
So that was interesting to be able to bring it in, and then to think, how do we keep so much stuff separated and know that it was with a certain address or certain house. And so that was important to try to place it in the room so we can use all of our space, but yet have a little bit a space that this pile came from this address.
Now separate pallets hold evidence from each grow: the mercury bulbs, reflectors, dirt, ballasts, light switches, timers. But one thing is different about these cases compared to other drug cases.
We have never, as a procedure, kept the drug, which would be the marijuana, stored here. But because of the amount of marijuana, there was no choice but to keep it here. Typically, we would not want to store marijuana or any drug in this building. We just never have, but we really didn't have a choice in this matter because there was so much.
That's because of the decision to prosecute under federal guidelines instead of state ones.
We had to change the way that we did collect the evidence. In state court, we would not take the whole plant and all. Now in federal court, you need to take the root, the leaves, the stems, everything to document that there was in fact a growing plant.
So why Lincoln, a city known more for being the home of the Huskers than anything else?
Don't know yet. We believe there may be some family ties that have brought individuals to Lincoln, Nebraska. Lincoln's fairly rural in location, and the availability of some of the equipment and items necessary for a grow operation are maybe more available, but why Lincoln as opposed to Omaha, why Lincoln as opposed to Kansas City or Grand Island or any community in and near your location, I can't answer that, other than don't be surprised that you don't find them there, because I believe as this grows and the people recognize the profitability of marijuana grows, that this problem become more widespread.
Amazing. A dozen big grow busts in a few months. Well, that would probably strain any department, wouldn't you say? And let's talk a minute about the dangers here of indoor and outdoor grow houses. A $14 million drug bust for this particular example. Jason, does this happen in all different kind of types of houses?
Yes, you've got growers that will range anywhere from 1 to 5 plants, college kids growing in their closet.
Just for their own personal use.
Yeah, and their friends and whatnot. Yeah. But, and it's, you have personal users that will grow their own stash, and then you also have commercial growers that will grow anywhere from 1 to every room in the house, multiple houses. And in Middle Tennessee, we had a pot cave, which was pretty popular in the email circuit. Mm-hmm. But, and he had 8,000 plants underground. So, anywhere that they can get light and create the the environment to grow marijuana, we're finding that growers are adapting to that.
One of the law officers had said that the smell was very noticeable. Is it, there's obviously a noticeable smell when the pot is burning, but is it from the drugs or from the plants themselves? Are they emitting a certain type of smell?
Usually you can smell marijuana even outdoors once it starts maturing, and the female buds or the flowers on the plant, you know, they're very potent, and you can smell those from a distance. As the very young plants, or once they first start growing, you know, it's really hard to smell other than just a green kind of plant type odor.
But it's growing. Brian, what about getting meth teams involved with eradication of marijuana?
We're actually seeing that in Albuquerque, because in Albuquerque our detectives that work narcotics work both the meth labs but also the marijuana cases. And we'll take our meth lab truck out there and use some of the same equipment for personal protective. When we do the breathing, respiratory breathing equipment, different types of suits, protective suits, chemical suits. Usually it's a little less protective because the chemicals are different, but we're still wearing breathing protection when we do the indoor grows.
Do you usually find a mix where a house that's producing meth is also growing marijuana, or vice versa?
We haven't noticed that, and I haven't heard of a trend of that. If they have it, it's probably a little marijuana grow with the meth. But the meth labs usually are different. It's a different type of drug.
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the dangers to law enforcement and others from these homegrown and homemade drug threats. Stay with us.
Okay, do you smoke?
No.
Do you drink alcohol regularly?
No.
He won't tell her that he's been inhaling crystal meth.
Deep breath.
Because he doesn't know. The house he moved into was once a crystal meth lab and is still toxic.
I'll be right back.
So who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/meth.
I started using crank, just a dirty form of methamphetamine. I was just extremely paranoid and hallucinating bad. I was talking to myself, talking to the air conditioners. Ugh. I ended up on my front porch with a .357 Magnum pistol shooting at people that weren't there. I can overcome legal problems, and I can live with 7 felony convictions on my record, but some of the things that I had to do to myself for the sake of drugs, it's not something that you forget. Meth was bad. It was really bad.
Hey, welcome back to Homegrown and Homemade Drug Threats. Well, growing marijuana or making methamphetamine can be dangerous to not just the grower or cooker, but also to first responders. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the dangers here to both of these. We had just seen a piece in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, about marijuana growing. It was just so interesting to me, talking about the smell, the electrical diversion that had taken place, mold, mildew, live wires, etc. What kind of dangers are we seeing in these houses? Are people living in these houses, some of them?
Yes, in some cases. We have had incidents where the grower will actually live in the house and use his garage as a grow room, along with 1 or 2 of the bedrooms. So, you know, they kind of bring it upon themselves with the molds and the problems.
So they're being poisoned by their own
Yes.
process.
Yeah, and, you know, we have had situations where kids live in the home also. You know, so, I mean, the grower themselves bring a lot on themselves, I guess. But also, you know, we run into these property owners that the renters had been growing dope, and they actually cut out and installed a wall mount or window mount air conditioning unit in a bathroom going into one of the 3rd bedrooms in the lower area. So, you know, they've done thousands of dollars damage just to try to create this environment for the growing of marijuana. And upstairs was all living quarters. It was 3 college kids.
And the owner was unaware that all this had taken place in the
Yes,
house he was living in.
until after we raided the house, and you know, everyone kind of moved out of it, and he went to check on it and found that everything was gone and the damage had been done.
Brian, I'm sure you have a story.
Oh, we have a lot of different labs with the hazards. Finding children's what tears me apart, being a father and a grandfather.
Children all in
Finding
the same
kids
home, yeah.
living in the house where they're cooking dope, and the excuses the parents will come up with. I remember one father telling me, well, I never cook when my kid's here. I only cook in this room. And then we would show him how the contamination spread and was into the kid's room, and he was like, he never even thought of something like that. Not that he probably would have cared anyway, though. He'd have still made his meth. So seeing the children, the people, meeting officers in Utah, talking to them that have serious health problems because of their lab exposures.
Because they
not
walked
wearing
in
protect-
unaware?
Unaware, untrained, unequipped, even when they had the proper training. They didn't have the proper equipment. Departments of people. As police officers, we look for dangers. Well, with this, you don't see it. And it's not always the immediate health hazards. It's health hazards from exposures that hit 10 years later, 15 years later, and they have cancer, respiratory problems, liver and kidney problems. So
what
we
should
have
a
these
first
problems.
responder do?
The best thing is to make sure they get the training. It's hard to identify labs now versus labs 20 years ago when they were this huge chemistry set. Now it's everyday household equipment, and it's small amounts. Like I said, instead of making 2 ounces once a week, they're making a half ounce 3, 4, 5 times a week.
And not just in the house, it could be in a
Doing
car.
the house, the car, the shed. So the officers need to be trained what to look for, and when they see indicators of it, to clear out of there and have a lab team that has the proper equipment, the chemical suits, the breathing equipment, have them come in and do a full-blown assessment.
Did the small shake and bake manufacturing guys, do they also have the same dangers of fire and explosion?
In some ways, the shake and bake's more dangerous because you have lithium in a container that's water reactive and catches fire in a container with water, and it's rolling all around as it's cooking. So a lot of those will catch fire, and you have a couple liters of a flammable liquid when those things go up. So they're very hazardous, but they're smaller than the old labs, so people think smaller, not as dangerous. But in a lot of ways, they're probably even more dangerous with the hazards than the old ones.
Jason, do your first responders also have to wear protective gear where they go? It might be an indoor, might be outdoor.
A lot of it depends. If it's an indoor grow, unless it is a large operation, I mean, there's always going to be the chance for molds and things. But unless it's a large indoor...
Is there a larger or a more prevalent chance of having the mold and mildew within an indoor grow?
Yes.
Okay.
And there are certain molds that are on the marijuana plant itself, so you run into that in the outdoor also. But, the outdoor, the environment's more open and you have a lot more oxygen, a lot more airflow, whereas your indoor grows are confined spaces in a lot of situations.
So you have the poor ventilation is involved and so forth. I was just really blown away by that piece that we saw from Lincoln, Nebraska about how sophisticated it was with the air ducting and the electrical. Of course, it wasn't up to code, or it was well below code, but it just was amazing to see that. Well, many jurisdictions have task forces to deal with methamphetamine. The Albuquerque Police Department, for example, where Brian works, takes it even further. They have a comprehensive approach to dealing with methamphetamine and the problems that come with it.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Calm, peaceful, and beautiful from 10,000 feet up. But like any other town, it isn't without its problems.
The big crime problems in Albuquerque are related to property crimes, and mostly we see people committing burglaries, robberies, auto thefts, different thefts of property, identity and such for the purposes of fueling their drug habits. They don't care how many doors they have to kick in, how many neighborhoods they have to ravage through, how many people's jewelry boxes and heirlooms they need to steal to fuel their habit, but we're trying to get that message out to people that these people are drug addicted and they will do what they need to do to feed their habit.
The drug of choice is often methamphetamine, and Albuquerque has a comprehensive approach to removing labs from all kinds of buildings.
Well, the Albuquerque Police Department is taking a very aggressive stance as far as methamphetamine manufacture and sale in the city of Albuquerque. We know what it does as far as the crimes that are associated with it. And so we were making very, very, very aggressive efforts to keep it out of our community. And when we do find a meth lab, we're quick to address it, take it down, and prosecute the people who are responsible.
Spreading the word is key, and the department's meth trailer is always ready to go.
We keep ourselves educated on the latest trends, and our meth team is very good at doing that, of getting information out to officers. If you see these kinds of blister packs, that's indicative of a meth lab. If you see this ingredient, that's indicative of a meth lab. If you smell this scent, that's indicative of a meth lab. And not only do we train our police officers, we also train people in our community, people that run hotels and motels, because oftentimes we see these meth labs set up in hotels and motels. And we train everybody in the community that wants to know, what should I look for to find a meth lab.
Officers often find children living in the houses where their parents are making meth. The police have a procedure they follow.
The kids get turned over more than likely to our state, which is Children, Youth and Families, our state organization. You cannot raise a child in a house where there's a meth lab, an active meth lab, and the dangers that are associated with it. A child's safety is paramount. So even if it means we've got to take the child from mommy or daddy right then and there, that's what we're going to do to make sure that child is safe.
Almost all law enforcement departments have narcotics teams working on meth cases. The Albuquerque PD takes things even further with 2 unique teams.
The Safe City Strike Force is a coordinated effort between the City Attorney's Office, City Planning, which handles our code enforcement and zoning, and the Fire Marshal's Office, as well as, of course, the Albuquerque Police Department, in order to address properties that have problems across a broad spectrum, whether they be a basis for criminal activity or just something the neighbors are concerned about. There are other jurisdictions that do various levels of integrating code enforcement and doing legal action, those sorts of things. I think we're unique in the level of coordination that we undertake.
This empty lot is a result of strike force efforts.
Initially, you had a neighbor call in about the condition of the house, which was beginning to get run down. From there, we started a file on it and had been observing the house, and then a short time later, we received a call about frequent coming and going from the property. So the code inspector had some concerns, but then the detective who works with him was able to put 2 and 2 together and say, hey, based on everything I'm seeing, we need to have narcotics look at this property.
There was a meth lab inside. The meth team dismantled everything, but the house was a contaminated mess, so code enforcement condemned it. The strike force efforts kicked in again.
We have 2 ordinances, a meth ordinance that establishes violations for meth contamination specifically, and then we have another criminal nuisance abatement ordinance, which basically says that you can be declared a nuisance, and that is a further violation. The city can take action against you.
And the city did act by bulldozing the contaminated house. Albuquerque will get some of its money back.
There's a lien placed on the property, and so whoever buys this particular property will have to clear the lien and pay back the city for the demolition prior to being able to purchase it.
The team's efforts mean peace of mind for anyone trying to buy property that was once a meth lab.
You have a whole team, environmental health, code inspectors, zoning inspectors, code enforcement officials, fire marshal, all these different things that can be brought to bear on the property owner to ensure that a thorough cleaning of the property is done, the remediation is done properly. The purchasing realtor, on behalf of their client, can call up the city and have absolute, and be shown the files that yes, the home has been remediated and tested, or in this case, there is no other problems with this property at all, and so the buyer can feel safe. And so you're able to redevelop this and the other plots of land around the city.
The members of the other special team come out when it's dark. They're members of NIGHT, the Albuquerque Police Department's night investigations team.
We're a team consisting of 8 detectives and myself as a supervisor. And what we do is we coordinate data from our crime analysis unit, the burglary unit, auto theft, Crime Stoppers, and we try to locate where our problem areas are. And with that given information, we try to come up with ideas or strategies to try to eliminate at least some of the percentage as far as the property crime rates that are occurring.
The newspaper has noted the team's successes. The goal is to find the people committing the property crimes that fuel drug habits before they commit the crime.
Within the first month, we've already had individuals that we were looking for say, we knew you guys were looking for us. We knew you guys were looking for us. And so that's a good thing. We want them to know that, hey, we're out there and we'll go undercover. I mean, we'll get guys in a wheelchair on Central with a wallet sticking out with money, and we'll see who's going to be that one guy who's going to try to bite the bait. because it may be something small, but that one individual could be responsible for multiple smash and grabs or perch snatching. That's who I want.
The ultimate goal of the Albuquerque Police Department? To make the city as calm, peaceful, and beautiful down there as it is up on the mountain that overlooks it.
Oh, very, very interesting. Jason and Brian, are there spin-off crimes associated with the making of meth and the growing of marijuana?
Yeah, with the marijuana grows, especially out west where there are a lot of these medical pharmacies and these medical growing operations for marijuana, we're starting to hear a lot about increases in home invasions and violence from competition or other people trying to take over the grows or take the grows out. Then, even with the medical marijuana side of things, you've got medical fraud and things along those lines where they're faking illnesses to get the medical marijuana cards. Yeah, so, but overall, and then you get back in just the regular drug crimes because of the marijuana and having to buy it or sell it, or it's its own, I guess, little crime wave in some aspects.
Has this become a huge cash crop in many areas?
Yeah, it's a cash crop in several states, and of course, it's hard to get official numbers, but there's a couple of different studies. One with the federal government does, and then also some of the different pro-drug groups and pro-marijuana groups. They try to estimate what growers have grown that we may not actually seize on eradication efforts, and they're saying several states it's the top crop if it was a legitimate crop.
Wow. Brian, what about spin-off crimes associated with meth?
I think there's more spin-off crimes affiliated with meth than probably any other drug.
Really?
There are just so many. We looked for a long time, and it was all about the property crimes that spun off with it, especially the white-collar identity theft, mail theft. That related right back into the meth
theft and so forth.
Theft of that things. That was how they were making their money. Real big into auto theft. But recently, we're seeing an increase with our violent crimes. As Donnie had said, working the he's the nighttime property crimes team, but they're even having to deal with violent crimes that are affiliated with meth. We're seeing bank robbers that are robbing banks, meth addicts. We're seeing violence now within the meth trade that was traditional for the crack dealers, shooting each other and then seeing innocent people killed. So we're seeing a lot of increases with the different crimes related into it.
I'm just curious, what kind of money does a person need to have? If they're hooked on this meth, what kind of money do they be spending on a daily basis?
They can spend a few $100, $100 to $150, $200.
Most
of them
basis.
On a daily basis. The one thing, meth isn't a profit-driven drug like a lot of other drugs. Those that are involved in the drug trade with it, especially that are users, are just doing enough, making enough money to just keep regenerating their drugs. But it's $20 for a quarter gram, and you can go through several of those a day with long-term addiction. And when you use it, you go for days and days and days to a week or two of continuous use, which is unusual.
Of not sleeping?
Not sleeping
eating,
or anything.
drinking, or
yeah,
anything?
you're talking people that are going 7-14 days of continuous use during that 7 to 14 days, so that can start adding up.
And you can pretty much tell that if you see somebody.
It starts showing to them.
It would start to show.
Yeah, it starts wearing on the body.
Where are we seeing an increase of marijuana and meth? Well, I'll start with marijuana with you.
I think with the marijuana, of course, you got a lot of states that are trying to pass these medical marijuana restrictions or regulations.
Not just out west.
Yeah. There's some up north, and even in Tennessee, we've got a couple of different bills going through House and Senate that they're actually doing study committees on the use and how they'll set it up if it passes. So, a lot of states are considering it. And in some aspects, you're just really creating an open legal market for the illegal activities, because the cartels have picked up on this. And a lot of times, we're our own worst enemies when it comes to a lot of these laws and things that we pass. But take California, for example, where it's legal to grow so much marijuana in a medical standing. And then you've got these cartel grows. Well, they can turn around and nonchalantly sell their product to these medical dispensaries. So now the illegal criminal organizations have a legal outlet for their product.
So you're having competition, you're having the small and the large groups, each trying to get a piece of the market, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You had mentioned earlier about booby traps and so forth. What kind of things does law enforcement need to be on the outlook for?
For your outdoor grows, you know, it goes back to kind of the Vietnam era. Booby traps, punji boards. They'll dig holes, put nails and things in the bottom of them to where when you're walking through, step on the leaves or the sticks, and you'll fall through and hit the punji boards in the bottom of the hole.
Something that would maim a person.
Yes.
Pretty severely.
It may not, you know, and a lot of the booby traps won't actually be as bad to kill you, but they will do a lot of damage, especially with breaking legs and, you know, arms and things like that.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah, and but there's also like weapons, homemade shotgun style setups to where you take a rat trap, some piping, and make kind of like a makeshift shotgun, where when you trip a wire or step on a certain area that, you know, it'll actually detonate or fire a shotgun round.
So if you're not law enforcement and you come upon this, stop.
Yes. You
Back
definitely
off.
don't want to go and be nosy or try to
Right.
crawl into it or see what's going on. You know, best thing to do is back out. You know, if you came in a way that you are pretty comfortable that's safe, come back out and just notify law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. What about booby traps associated with the large labs?
The larger labs, and it's not even so much the booby traps that we were seeing 20, 25 years ago. The larger labs are going to have people there to protect it. They're going to have good weapons. Because we're talking with large labs, multi-million-dollar operations that are probably being controlled by drug cartels and trafficking organizations.
And you're probably not
out of
referring to
Mexico.
handguns. You're talking
No,
about
automatic
large.
weapons,
Mhm.
assault rifles,
Right.
and such. With the littler labs, you're still going to have some weaponry. The paranoia, the things that the drug does to the people creates a danger with dealing with that person too, their paranoia and such. In most booby traps that we do see, a lot of them, they're there to destroy the lab, thinking, well, if I blow my lab up or burn it up, there's no criminal case. And so you just got to make sure that if it goes off, you're not standing nearby. But luckily with us, it's a big reduction in booby traps, but the cook and the
They're
people
still
there are our big hazards.
All right. Well, we're going to take another short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation and talk about what can be done to combat these homegrown and homemade drugs. Stay with us.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/meth.
There's never been anybody lower than me. I used to shoot meth with my daughter.
My worst day not using meth is better than my best day whenever I was using meth.
I'm still baffled by the speed of how I lost everything so quickly.
Someone has to want to stop. It's not an easy road. It's not an easy road to stop.
That's what did it. My mom finally said that we can't watch you do this to yourself anymore.
You can recover from methamphetamine abuse. I'm proof of it.
And welcome back. Homegrown and homemade drug threats. Well, knowing something is a problem and then doing something about it are two entirely different things. In our final segment, we're going to talk about what all of us can do about these homegrown and homemade drug threats. Gentlemen, what are the indicators? What do you see when you go out? For example, Jason will talk about an indoor grow. What do you see?
They're kind of hiding in plain sight. You've got, you know, a 3-bedroom house up to a $500,000 house. The thing to look for a lot of times is, you know, windows covered. If it's an area that gets a lot of snow and you have an indoor grow or a large indoor grow, there may be a portion of the roof that isn't holding snow because their heat, they're venting out the attic or something. You know, there's a lot of little indicators like that, but really the most evident would be just, you know, kind of keeping an eye on your neighborhood, watching the actual activities at the house, especially with these cartel-related indoor grows. They've just got kind of overseers. They don't practically live in the house for the most part. They'll show up odd hours of the day or night, unload materials, and then leave. They just kind of come in, check things, and go on to the next house and do the same. So, you know, really the biggest indicator is just kind of the overall activity of what you would consider a average, everyday neighborhood, you know, resident, and anything aside from that, you know, is something to kind of keep an eye on.
Okay. Brian?
Anywhere and everywhere. That's the one change. Meth used to be called the poor man's cocaine, and so we thought of it in the lower economic areas. And
seeing it
we're
maybe
seeing
in
it
rural areas, and now
yeah,
it's everywhere.
rural areas, the poor neighborhoods, but it's anywhere and everywhere. We're taking it off in upscale apartments, long-term hotel places, nice houses. We've taken several. Remember one we had to do trying to walk around the indoor swimming pool that where the lab was, and our fear of falling into the pool.
Oh my.
But anywhere and everywhere anymore. Don't limit yourself. And even, you know, in cars, campers,
So there,
things like that.
Okay, many dangers. There's also air quality problems associated with both of these?
Definitely.
Yes.
Are there tests that you do prior that you can test and see there's
When we
hazardous
go
air?
into a meth lab, we will take in air monitor devices measuring for certain things. Depending on the type of lab production method, we'll look for specifics, like in red phosphorus, checking for phosphine versus an anhydrous ammonia, we'd be monitoring for ammonia. But other things, explosive limits, air quality. So we do a lot of monitoring, ventilating the location out to get that air quality back a little better. But that's why we stay in respiratory protection the whole time.
Jason, is there kind of an attitude perhaps with law enforcement that this is just marijuana, there can't be any air problems or hazards here?
Yeah, and it's a relatively new, I guess, idea or a new problem that we've really not got up to speed with. Just in the past 2 or 3 years, I've seen more of a push for air quality monitoring and respiratory protection and things like that.
And you do have that test? You have that kind of equipment to help you do that?
Yes. In Tennessee, sometimes we will fall back on the meth task force to borrow their equipment, but our marijuana units or you know, the local departments, we're really not up to speed. Because this is such a new area on trying to apply a lot of because it's really not an actual meth lab, marijuana grow that is.
Okay.
So we're trying to adapt on what we've learned from the meth labs on what we need and what we don't need to apply them to the marijuana grow environment.
So there's techniques that you can share between the two of you.
Yes.
That you can help each other.
Yeah,
There's things that come universal with this problem. Let's go back to the home, in particular a meth lab that's in a home. Can that be cleaned up?
It can.
Can that house be restored?
It can. In Albuquerque, we have a special city ordinance that deals with the decontamination and having companies come in and test and making sure that it's cleaned up or decontaminated to a certain level. And so it can be done. It's an expensive process. A lot of times our homeowners just walk away from the houses because it's too expensive. Insurance companies aren't going to pay for it.
And so then what is done?
In Albuquerque, we destroy the homes. We'll tear the house down. As you saw in the one, that was about a $250,000 home that, because of the levels of contamination, they just had to bulldoze it down. On occasion, we've done that.
So you did that. Did you have any problems with the former owner or the landlords or any of that?
On this one, they go through the court system and do it all proceedings, court orders on all of it. So it's a well laid out ordinance with the steps, so that if the homeowner does want to clean it up, say it's somebody who was renting to a person that put a lab in there and they didn't know it, the city with our nuisance abatement unit will help that homeowner walk through the process of making sure they get their property back up to standards so that it's safe to rent out again.
Is the same thing apply with marijuana grows? Is there a home safety issue here? I mean, can it be cleaned up?
Yeah, and a lot of times the longer the grow is in operation, the more damage it's going to cause, because you've got to consider you're bringing in some operations, if it's a regular dirt grow, then you've got a large amount of potting soil, and then you've got the moisture and the buildup. So you got molds and insects. I mean, a lot of things going on. And even with hydroponic, you've got so much water flowing through that you get a lot of mold and spores and things like that. So the bigger and the longer the operation goes, the farther it will damage the house.
So that just permeates into the structure, the studs, the drywall, et cetera, et cetera. And plus, they've altered the electrical supply and the air supply many times, correct?
Yeah, and they will take and a lot of times run the ventilation out through the attic and through the heat vents and things. But they'll cut holes in walls, stairwells. I mean, just a little bit of everything because they've got their primary objective and they've got to actually achieve it. So if that means cutting through a wall to add in ventilation, then that's what they have to do. Yeah,
they do whatever they have to do. Let's change speeds here for just a moment and talk about pseudoephedrine laws. It seems that cooks have found a way around them.
Somewhat. It's made it more difficult for them, which is part of why. Slow them down a little bit, why our lab sizes tend to have decreased in sizes.
Has this led to I'm sorry to interrupt, has this led to the shake and bake?
Part of it, I think part of it is just looking for faster ways.
Okay.
But it's made the shake and bake a lot more popular because it tends to be a much smaller quantity of meth made at one time. The days of getting to go into a Walmart, Kmart, or any of these larger stores and just cleaning the shelves off and walking away with 20 or 30 boxes are over with. Now to get those 20 boxes, you're going to have to go to 10 or 15 different stores. So it's slowed them in that. What it has done is provide us with a great tracking and an investigative tool. In New Mexico, we're just starting up our electronic tracking system where stores are going to start sending us, and some already have, sending us the sales of pseudoephedrine, and we can combine it from all these different stores and know who's buying in excessive amounts. We actually have a program that they started in Tennessee, and we're implementing it in New Mexico now.
So is this data coming automatically from pharmacies and stores, or do you have to go and flesh this out?
Right now we're dealing with, I got to go to store to store to store and look it up. Now we're starting to have them send it electronically to us, and I have a
Is that just
program.
because of your
We were able to get a
particular
grant in New Mexico through the Albuquerque Police Department that set this up, but it's going to be used statewide by law enforcement.
And is this repeated state by state?
Different states are trying to implement this, and there's an attempt to try to make this a national program.
Do you find pharmacies are cooperative with this?
I find the pharmacists are very cooperative.
Really?
They don't want these people coming to their stores either. They don't want to deal with them. So we get a lot. The vast majority of the tips I get are coming from my pharmacists calling up saying, here's these people, they're buying it together, we know what they're doing, we know the telltale signs you've taught us, and it's the corporations that we're having less cooperation with.
Really? So what is the feeling about making pseudoephedrine a prescription drug?
There's a big push on that. The National Meth and Pharmaceutical Initiative that Albuquerque participates in, that's one of their main focuses now, is to look at making pseudoephedrine a prescription drug. There's 2 states, Oregon and just in July, Mississippi went to prescription. And that's looking at a solution. The tracking system is an investigative tool that's making it harder. Making a prescription probably can help us solve or have a bigger impact on the lab problem. Yeah. So
Jason,
it's something we're looking at.
Jason, what about the punishment associated here? Is there a punishment enough to stop people, or is it just to slow them down?
Well, because everybody doesn't see marijuana as being such a harmful drug in areas, then we do see, have some problems getting prosecution, or, a typical sentence will be probation. So
not strong enough punishment.
Yeah, when you consider how much money that they will make off a marijuana grow compared to what time they'll end up serving. I mean, we're getting repeat marijuana growers, and we really combated that problem back in the 80s when the federal government kicked in federal courts and really hammered a lot of these marijuana growers. And now that they've kind of eased off of it, state courts are already overloaded with other things. So it's really hard to get prosecution on marijuana. So now we're looking at maybe approaching them from the theft diversion, or the electrical diversion, or the electrical theft, and the conspiracies on the actual organization growing, rather than just the marijuana charge alone.
So that would become the backdoor way to go in and get this process going?
Yes.
With the electrical. What about meth in terms of punishment?
I think it's getting better. People are becoming more aware of the criminal justice system. The public at large is realizing these things are everywhere, and it's a hazard and a risk to everybody. And we're seeing increased penalties, increased prosecution. Again, I refer back to where I'm from in Albuquerque. Our prosecutor's office now has a special unit that does nothing but meth prosecution, have 3 prosecutors assigned, and that's all they do.
So it sounds like the money far outweighs the potential punishment here on both of these cases.
Definitely.
When it comes to meth, what do you happen to know what the first punishment would be? Somebody's caught, first-time user, what they normally would get?
A lot with first-time users is drug court. Drug courts are more and more common with any of our drug users.
Are you finding the punishment matches the crime, or is it lenient? What's your opinion of that?
I've actually changed my attitude somewhat over the years on drug court, and we're seeing more and more success with it. But with the meth cooks, even if they're a user, the punishment needs to be more serious because they're endangering just beyond their use of the drug and just the danger right there of the lab. They're creating a more hazardous situation throughout the entire neighborhood. So I think that punishment needs to be increased, and more enforcement and more following the guidelines that the law says, instead of saying, well, okay, our law says 9 years, but we're only going to give them 5. And such.
So sometimes it feels like it's a hand slap.
And many times, especially first or second time, they tend to let them off a few times.
Is there punishment both state and federal when it comes to marijuana pot growth?
Yes, there's actually minimal mandatories in federal court, and some states are more strict on it than others. Teaching around the country and talking with different officers, you can have a pound is a misdemeanor in some areas where it's a felony in others, or half ounce is a felony in some areas where an ounce or less is a misdemeanor. So there's really no uniform charge or a uniform amount across the nation. But now with federal law, it's pretty cut and dry. More than 1,000 plants, it's this type of penalty. More than 500 is this. 100 or more, it's a minimum mandatory in some areas.
Do you think it should be more universal throughout the states?
It would probably make it easier. Of course, every state's different. Every state has different marijuana problems. The Tennessee problem is different from that problem in Kentucky, even though we're that close. You compare our states to the western states, it's a completely different program. So,
What do you do with the evidence? Does it get destroyed after the trials or whatever is done?
Yes, and a lot of that depends on your prosecutor. In different areas, they have different restrictions. But like with marijuana grows, a lot of times we'll just keep samples and then destroy the rest of the plants, and we hold on to the equipment until court. In other areas, they want all the plants from the roots all the way up to the buds or the plant material itself. So, it all varies on your court system and your prosecutor.
We're at that point in time where we're about out of time, so I quickly would like to have a final thought. About 15, 20 seconds. Brian, I'll ask you.
Hazards with the meth labs are real. We need to prepare ourselves, get trained, get educated, get the proper equipment, and do it the safe way, because the risks show up down the road. The best saying I ever heard was a California narcotics agent said, meth labs are the Agent Orange of law enforcement. The hazards are going to show up 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So we need to protect ourselves now so we don't have the problems after we leave the profession.
Very good. Jason, quickly?
Just indoor grows are on the increase, and I think that across the nation we need to kind of keep an eye on it and try to address it on the front end rather than trying to put it out at the end or once it gets kind of out of hand.
Very good. Well, thank you guys. That is all the time we have. On behalf of Jason Poore and Brian Salee, I'm Stan Rhodes. Thanks for watching Homegrown and Homemade Drug Threats. Thank you.